Maria Chaleos and Ton Bettis with you from the KSL Greenhouse. Today we are at the USU Botanical Center. We are in Kaysville at the Edible Gardens, and we're here with horticulturist Sheridan Hansen. Thanks so much for having us out here today.
Yeah, thanks for coming up. I'm really excited for you guys to see the gardens.
We are so excited to be here and learn about this edible garden. So describe for us exactly what is the purpose of the garden and what do you have here?
So we have a lot of different crops here. This vegetable garden was put in 2015 with the purpose of showcasing different things that you can grow in Utah, things that are kind of atypical. So we have all kinds of things that you may not know you can grow in your garden here.
I like the atypical. Give us an example.
So we have lychee, which is a type of solanaceous crop, so in the tomato family, but has spines, and it has this fruit that is kind of pokey and funky to look at. We've got okra, we've grown cotton and soybeans and all kinds of fun stuff in this garden.
Ton, this has to be pretty fun for you. I mean, you talk about this stuff all the time, but to actually be able to show people is another thing.
It's really nice to be here because we've got everything in close quarters, from raspberries to grapes to the unique crops and more common crops, and it's just a great teaching area. But when you talk about such things, to be able to take pictures or even show people, it's so nice to have these demonstration gardens.
Before we wander around and see all the wonderful things people can come out and see, I want you to talk about this year's growing season. It's been a difficult one, even for you, the experts, and talk about that for a minute.
It has been really tough. So we went from a very cold, wet spring to just temperatures that were off the charts high. So that wild fluctuation in temperature, the winds that we've had has made it extremely difficult. So if you are a gardener and you have struggled this year, you are not alone, because I've struggled, Ton struggled. We've lost a lot of the tomatoes here in this garden due to some disease problems that were probably environmentally influenced from some of those temperature swings. And we've struggled. We've honestly very much struggled.
Talk for a minute, Ton, about the explosion in gardeners. I mean, it's been an interesting couple of years with the pandemic. A lot more people getting excited about gardening.
Well, since 2009, we've had a couple dips in the economy, and we're maybe going into one again. And whenever you see turmoil, unsettled news, rumors of wars and things, people all of a sudden want to take up gardening because it gives you some security. Even if you can't find it in the stores and you can grow it and can it yourself or preserve it yourself, it gives you a little bit of food security, and that's one of our most basic needs is food. And so I think there's this just instinctive, innate desire to have sufficient to eat. And every time we get into a dip in the economy, gas is $5 a gallon, it scares people on an instinctive level, and we want to start gardening, but then people find out they love gardening and continue with it. And so I think Gen Xers weren't as interested in gardening. The economy was good, we kind of got away with it, but since 2008, 2009, there's been a huge resurgence in interest. And so things like this garden here, Sheridan and I have a lot of our jobs devoted to just teaching about gardening and raising crops.
The other thing that we've seen is a lot more younger gardeners.
Yes.
People getting excited about coming back to gardening. They maybe didn't want to weed in their parents' garden, but now, oh, hey, they can grow their own food.
Right? It's not a chore now, it's fun.
Yeah, and one thing about this garden is, like, growing up, when my parents gardened, it was the traditional huge garden, everything was row run, weeds everywhere that had to be pulled, and I know it's a learning experience for kids, but I spent time growing up, you have an hour a day of pulling weeds, and with just a little bit of tweaking, gardening can be made so much easier. And so another important aspect are the methods of irrigation in here, because drip irrigation and smart watering reduces weeding by anywhere from 50 to 80%.
Okay, no one likes weeding. Even those of us who love to be out in the yard all day don't love weeding. So this is an educational process. Talk about how people can get their children more excited about gardening.
Oh, that is one topic that is near and dear to my heart, because I have two boys and trying to get them out in the garden. I had a small farm for a long time, and it was important to me that they would learn how to do those skills and have that in their back pocket for one day if they ever needed to know how. So getting them out into the garden, growing things that, number one, are easy to plant. So seeds like beans and peas are so easy to plant, and they typically come up quickly and grow fast, so you can get kind of an instant gratification almost from that seed planting to coming up. And then plant things that they love to eat. So cherry tomatoes are one of those things. You know, anything that's sweet that they love, you're going to want to put that in that garden. And then, you know, you make a big deal out of it. You go out there with them and you hold their hand, and it's this process of teaching them in tow, kind of, and getting them excited about things. And then go inside and cook with it. Slice up that cucumber, put salt on it, let them taste it, and see what the fruits of their labor were and how excited they can be with it.
Before we take a look at the gardens, and you can show us all of these wonderful things, why is it that you love gardening? I mean, you are out here all day, every day, right?
All day, every day, it feels like. When I have to go into the office, it feels like a bad day. But I do love to be out here. So I grew up in the garden with my parents and with my grandfather. So I credit my grandfather a lot with getting me into the garden. So he would keep a salt shaker in the garden, and we'd go out and we'd pick tomatoes, and he'd have a pocket knife, we'd slice it up right there, salt it, and right into our mouths it would go. And that was when I really kind of had this light bulb moment on, like, I can grow unique things, I can grow what I love, and this is something that I can do to help myself. So I've always had a garden. My dad was a golf course landscaper and designer, so I spent my whole childhood either in a garden or at a golf course being designed and built and put in. So it's just kind of been my life, and I love it. If I can't be outside, it's almost like there's a piece of me that's just not getting fulfilled. So this is horseradish. This is something that may not be on your radar of something to grow, but it's something that is really kind of easy to grow. It's a root. We've put it in a raised bed because it can be invasive. So if you do want to grow something like this, you want to contain it. So either a container or a raised bed, somewhere where it's not going to spread. And how you plant this is you order a start of it, and you'll get a piece of root, and you plop that right into the ground, and it ends up growing and looking like this. And to harvest, we're going to actually dig up those roots. I'm never going to be able to get rid of all the roots here, so this will always be horseradish. But something that you can grow, and then you can grind up, make your own horseradish if you're into those types of flavors and things like that, but a great crop for Utah.
Seems pretty healthy, and it needs to have its own space, right?
It does. It has to have its own space, and you can see how large it gets, and it really does fill a space easily.
Can you make horseradish sauce out of this?
Yes, you can.
It's
Absolutely.
Green. The sauce isn't green.
No, it's not green. It's the root that you're going to use. So we're going to harvest the root out of it, and the root is white. Yeah, so kind of crazy. Things we never thought about.
Well, isn't this also somewhat shade tolerant?
It can be a little bit shade tolerant. I do tend to keep it in the sun just because it will produce a larger plant. But if it does get drought stressed, it can create woody stems, or not stems, but woody roots on the bottom. And then, you know, you won't have the best quality horseradish. So a little bit of afternoon shade would be something that would benefit this plant.
Okay, walk through, show us some of the unusual things.
All right, so here we have, this is Aunt Molly's ground cherry. So if you've never tried ground cherries, they're in the tomato family, and they produce this papery husk over the fruit. The fruits aren't fully developed, but I'll show you what they kind of look like inside. So we get this little tiny fruit. These will turn yellow, and they're actually, when they're ripe, so sweet and so delicious. A really good alternative fruit to grow in your garden. And then this is called a lychee. So this is in the tomato family. So you can see the bloom looks like tomatoes blooms. They're white. They have the 5 petals. And then the fruit, let's show you the fruit here. It's really spiny. So this is something you may not want to grow with kids, but if you wanted to grow something fun and different, you have the spines on the outside of this. You end up just pulling this back, and then you have that fruit again. And you can see how that looked a lot like that ground cherry. Over here, we've got all different kinds of eggplants. So eggplant is something that is eaten throughout the world, a crop that maybe people don't necessarily think about, but they come in all different colors and shapes and sizes. So, you know, we've got this orange, Turkish orange eggplant. This one's called Little Fingers. And then, you know, you can even grow white ones, light lavender colored ones, and again, they come in all shapes and sizes, and these are typically eaten in Asia and in the Middle East. You'll see a lot of these different types of eggplants used, but they all grow well here in Utah.
How is the flavor different?
The flavor is really similar across the board. Sometimes it's the texture, so these smaller types of eggplants will have a better texture than some of the larger ones, and they're used more in like a stir-fry situation, or they're ground, not so much like eggplant parmesan like what we typically think of here.
Before we move on, I've noticed in a few areas in here that there's minor pest damage.
We have minor or major.
Yeah, and so I've noticed though that you're probably not spraying weekly or anything. What's your threshold when you decide to spray and when you decide to let it go?
That is a really good question, and since this is an edible garden, and I do have a lot of people that visit, and they will harvest things out of this garden as they walk through and they'll taste, I try not to spray. So yeah, you'll notice we've got grasshopper damage and we've got flea beetle damage. My threshold for spraying is when it starts to really affect production, and we have not affected production here in this area at all. We have a few holes in the leaves, and then we do have a lot of bees on site, so we keep an apiary here, so our spray regimen is really kept to a minimum as much as possible. So we've got all kinds of hot peppers here. Some of the hottest peppers that you can grow are actually in this bed, so I would not recommend that you taste these unless you really want to die. But you can see that there are different shapes, different colors. This one is kind of funky looking on the shape, and these are super hot. So we did have these labeled, and this is one bed that I didn't have mapped out as to what we had planted, and I had a cute little 2-year-old come and pull up all of our labels. So I can't tell you which one is which necessarily, but they are super hot. And these seeds were sourced from all over the world so that we could plant these and we could see how they grew, and we could taste the flavors and compare the heat. For our situation, here's a few more here. And you can see this one's very small, but I have a feeling it's extremely hot.
The other fun thing for me is all the different color variations of the leaves.
There are so many different color variations, and there's one that we've grown in the past that we didn't grow this year. It's called Chinese 5-color pepper, and you get literally 5 different colors of peppers coming on with this green background on the leaves, and that one's really beautiful. So these can even be placed in ornamental containers. You don't have to grow these in a vegetable garden setting. They add a lot to those types of plantings and situations.
There's actually a bloom, a pretty flower on them.
They're gorgeous, they're really pretty. So, related to tomatoes, so they have that same type of flower and look to them that you can see there. But really beautiful plants. And again, a tiny bit of pest damage, but not bad. And then we have sweet peppers. We have a number of different kinds of sweet peppers here. We have, oh look, we've got a rogue squash growing. This happens sometimes. We've got candy cane types of peppers. We've got pimento sheep nose peppers. So this is supposed to look like a sheep's nose, is why it was named that. And they'll turn red, so you can see them starting to turn. But we've got candy cane, mocha swirl, all different types of peppers that are sweet in here, and not necessarily large size. So if you're cooking for 1 or 2 people, maybe you want to grow something a little bit smaller like this instead of the great big bell peppers. And just pretty on the variation and the variegation on the fruit as well.
Can you get all of these at local nurseries? Because a lot of these are really unfamiliar to me. Or do you have to order the seeds? How do you
We tend to
tell
order
people?
the seeds. So we tend to order seeds from places like Burpee, Johnny Seeds. There are a number of different catalogs that you can source from online. And we do start most of our own seeds here on site. So that's why we can get some of these different varieties that maybe you're not as familiar with. Some of our local nurseries, though, as we have carried some of these different varieties, have started to expand some of their selections, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, I'm sure people have started asking for them.
Yeah,
what about
they do.
these?
What about these? Where are those at? We have Swiss chard here. So Swiss chard is something that people tell me is difficult for them to grow, and that's because it gets pest problems on it. So you can see we've got these little kind of arches here going over the bed, and what we did with this so that we didn't get leaf miner damage. So leaf miner is an insect that will lay eggs on the bottoms of the leaves, and then those eggs hatch, and the larva burrows in between the layers of the leaf, and it will just decimate the leaves. So that we didn't have that problem, we covered this with a row cover until about mid-June, and then we took it off, and so we were able to grow beautiful chard without the weed pressure, or without the insect pressure.
So if somebody's ever eaten beet greens, the chard's the same species, but this one was bred for the foliage, where the beets are bred for the root.
Yeah, really different application there of, you know, breeding and how to select plants for different characteristics, and that's happened throughout history.
Yeah. I grew up with my parents growing these, and they were kind of the bane of my existence.
Tom's like, no!
Eat your Swiss chard!
They're
I don't want
actually
any.
my favorite.
Yeah, they're not bad.
Ton.
I've been repenting myself, and a lot of these vegetables that I used to not eat are actually fabulous. So
These
yeah,
are
they're
sweeter
great.
than spinach,
They
I
are.
think.
Oh,
They're
yes,
just
they are
delicious.
much more sweet, and you know what? You don't even have to cook it down. I love it in salad, and look at the color variation that you get on the leaves, on the stems, and even if you do cook it down and saute it with some garlic and some butter, it's really good that way too. But it just adds so much color and beauty to whatever you're cooking, and that's why I really love it. It's delicious.
So it adds to the flavor palette and
Yes.
just to the aesthetic value of the
Aesthetic
food.
value,
And
absolutely.
these, when you cut them and harvest them, they regrow.
Yeah.
And so they'll last the entire summer, to where a lot of our leafy greens are a couple of harvest. You know, we would grow a whole row of these, and you just work your way down the row, and then when you got to the end of the row, the other side had grown back up, and you could keep cutting. And so we've grown up that my parents would cook it 2 or 3 times a week for the entire summer.
So for you as a child, it was a never-ending nightmare.
It was never ending, yes. Why
That's
can't
okay.
you grow Twinkies?
This one's kind of fun. So this one is called a Mexican sour gherkin. And this is a cross between a melon and a cucumber. And if we dig down in here, we can find some of the fruits. And they're very small, but you can see they have that watermelon-like skin. So you can see that variation in color that kind of reminds you of a watermelon. And then you pop it into your mouth, and it tastes like a cucumber. It is wild, so wild. It has been surprising for me, but I've been asked about this a number of times and finally decided, well, we better take the plunge and grow it so I can have some real hard evidence as to what it tastes
We've had
like.
a lot of people asking about it on Utah Gardening Experts
Yeah.
as a potential crop.
Yeah, well, and you can see the harvest isn't huge, but you know, it's kind of still early in the season for it, so I think we will get more as we work through the season, but it can be a prolific producer. You can see how large the vine is, and it does really well. It loves the heat, so when we were a little cooler, it just was struggling to get going, and as soon as the temperatures warmed up, it took off.
And it does well growing upward.
Yeah, so if you have a trellis that you want to utilize and get that growing upward, it works really well for it.
I love the more natural look of your
Yeah.
trellis. I really do. I'm not just saying that.
Yeah.
It
Well,
just
and this goes to
fits in
show
better.
you don't have to spend a lot of money on things in your garden. And these are just, what were these, from apples?
These are willow.
They're
They're actually
willow?
from the ponds across the
Yeah.
street. Yeah, so I needed a quick trellis, took our little 4x4 over there and cut down a bunch of, you know, what would be a weedy plant that was growing on the side of the pond, and brought it over and stuck it right in the ground. It works out great. So not very fluffy, but kind of natural looking. This is a python bean. Should probably mention this. It's in bloom right now. It's awesome. The flowers are amazing. Okay, so this is called a snake bean or a python bean. It is more in the melon family than it is in a bean type of family. So you can see that the leaves look like melons. It has these beautiful blooms that are frilled on the edges. And this produces what they call a bean, but it really is a melon that's extremely long and looks like a snake. It is about the size of a python. So they can be 3 feet long. They recommend that you harvest them though when they're about 9 to 12 inches long so that they're palatable. But a very interesting plant, kind of fun to grow in the garden, and just the bloom is exquisite. Another fun crop that we are growing this year, this is called Arthus Watermelon, and the story is that this watermelon was found in a cave in the desert southwest in a pot. They found seeds for it, and they grew out the seeds, and this is what grew out. And you can see how oddly shaped these fruits are for watermelon, but it is a watermelon. And you know, just kind of an ancient thing, kind of fun to keep some of these stories alive and the heritage of some of these different types of vegetables going. They're getting close to being ready to harvest. You can see we've got a tiny split there, but I'm waiting for the little tendrils right off of the main vine to start to shrivel, and that will be kind of my cue that it's time to harvest. But really kind of interesting plant to grow.
What type of flavor?
I don't know, because this is my first time growing it, so we'll try and eat one. I would assume that it would have a lot of seeds where it is kind of an ancient type of crop and plant, but I'll report back to you later.
It's fun to experiment though.
It is, and you know, that's all gardening is a big experiment. I've had a lot of people tell me that they're frustrated because they failed this year, but I try to turn it around to, well, what did you learn? And how can we make it better next year? So it is just a big experiment. Of course, we grow some of the basic things like squashes, raspberries, blackberries, all of those types of basic things that people can come and see and taste and figure out what kind of flavors and different crops that they may want to grow. But we also grow things like okra. This is called Star of David okra. You can see how large the fruit is on this. It's absolutely massive, but really beautiful. And when it blooms, I was hoping we'd have a bloom. Oh, right there. We've got a bloom open right there. You can see how exquisite the bloom is. So even growing this plant just for the blooms, I think, is beautiful. You could use this as a bedding plant in the background of a bed, and it would be gorgeous.
They are related, and well, they're in the hibiscus family, and so the blooms look a lot like hibiscus flower, or maybe even a hollyhock, but they're kind of a yellowish tint. And one thing about these that I think that is important to keep in mind, for us they're a novelty, but in areas of Africa and India and Asia, they are a staple food that are so important,
Very important.
to the nutritional needs of the people. And you know, a lot of times we'll grow a lot of these exotic crops and not consider that, you know, for us it's just kind of this fun hobby that we're growing, but in many parts of the world these crops are just so vitally important to the nutrition and just for energy for people that are living on more of a subsistence diet. And so there's areas in the United States and Canada that are doing research on okra to make them more adapted to northern climates or grow them in high tunnels. And so even though we like to grow them as a novelty, I just like to remember that, you know, and for a lot of cultures, they're just so important.
I think that's a really good discussion, and they are prolific. They produce quite a bit. We've grown okra before, and we've harvested just bucket loads. And so you can see how it would be that type of a crop that would be sustaining for a lot of different cultures.
Does it bloom all throughout the season? Because these are gorgeous.
It does.
blooms.
It blooms all throughout the season. So that's why I'm
So I
saying,
wouldn't
like,
mind putting that in my flower
you
bed.
could put that in a bedding plant and kind of double duty that bedding plant. You have the gorgeous bloom and the added benefit of okra. Now you have to learn how to cook it right too, right?
So it's not slimy.
Right?
Cook it so it's not slimy. USU recommends a variety called Annie Oakley too. I've had troubles finding it, but I've grown a few different varieties, and as long as they get heat,
Yeah.
they seem to be okay.
They love heat. And what do we have? Heat.
We do, and you have to start them a couple of months ahead of time.
You do. So yeah, we started these in the greenhouse, I believe in March, sometime in March. We've got, you know, again, some of those basic things. So we've got Roma tomatoes, we've got potatoes so that you can see how to grow potatoes, and we've also got cucumbers that have been trellised up cattle panels. We do like to demonstrate some of the different ways to grow things, and, you know, some of those basic things for new gardeners that they may not be familiar with how to grow a potato or what it even looks like. So having that here is a cue for a new gardener, what they're looking for when they garden. So this trellis is what's called a cattle panel or a hog panel. You can pick these up at farm stores, and literally all we've done is taken this very long panel and attached it to T-posts with just these zip ties. Really easy to do. It makes it so it's movable. It's not a permanent structure. Next year I can move it and crop rotate really nicely. But it is a really strong and sturdy support for something heavy like cucumbers, squashes, anything that's gonna have some weight on it. This will be able to hold up and handle that weight.
Yeah, you can see how the cucumbers are just growing up that and not having a bit of a problem, even though they're large.
Yeah, they are large. And we did help them just a little bit. So we've kind of helped get them up off the ground, and we continue to kind of pull them up and thread them through the trellis to just kind of support and encourage them to grow up, because they naturally want to run. So giving them that support to kind of go up is important. So we come through about once a week and pull them up off the ground. But it works out really well. And something you can reuse over and over and over again. So it's kind of a one-time investment. So we try to showcase a number of different ways to irrigate in the garden. So these are cowpeas here, and you can see that we've got this kind of flexible tape here. This is called drip tape. It has perforated holes every 4 inches in this line, and it has some pressure regulation. So this area, we used to run PVC with just holes drilled in it, but it didn't have pressure regulation, and we have a little bit of a slope here, so we would end up with all of the water on one side and no water on the other side. So this is a good fix for us. It was fairly inexpensive. It's a product that I picked up from Toro and easy to use. And we can contrast that with over here. We have drip irrigation that's called Inline Drip. And you can see it's this really not very beautiful purple tube. It also comes in brown, but the purple was donated to us, so that's what we're using. But this also has emitter holes punched into it. But this one's every 18 inches. You can get this every 12 inches, every 6 inches, depending on what your need is in the garden. And so this one's a little bit more durable. It's gonna last us year after year after year, where the drip tape, we can change, we can move, we can, adapt and throw something away if we need to, but it's not going to be as long lasting as something like this. But both of these methods conserve water, and you can see they put water right where our plant is. So if I line my plants up with these emitters, or very close to that drip tape row, I'm gonna get water right at the base of that plant, which is important for us here in Utah. This is one spot in the garden that we have had a massive failure in this year. We have tried to plant beans in this area 3 different times, and they just won't take. You can see a couple of spotty beans coming up. So even we fail, we struggle, we have problems in these gardens as well. And I know that some people are really feeling discouraged this year. Guess what? We're right in the same boat with you, and that's okay. Knowing that I'm failing with this crop here, with a crop that's probably pretty easy to grow and should be something that goes in the ground, comes up quick, and we're done. I'm going to maybe soil test this next year and see where we're at. Definitely crop rotate and see if I can deal with some of the problems that I'm seeing in the garden, and see if I can mitigate and work around what's been happening this year. But it could have just been temperature and heat and things like that. We didn't quite line up where we should have as far as planting times and growing out. Other things we've got going, we've got squash. Squash is beautiful, it loves the heat. We try to grow varieties that are a little more resistant to squash bug. So this is a butternut type variety. They tend to be a little more resistant, but we still get squash bugs. So once a week we come through here and we clean out any squash bugs, any eggs, things like that. But you can see how large of an area squash really needs. It's kind of surprising to think of how much area it needs. Other things we've got growing is corn. This is a different variety of corn called Painted Mountain corn. So this is one that's going to get those beautiful jewel tones on. You could grind it and use it as flour. We'll probably use these for our upcoming scarecrow walk for our purposes, but it would be something fun to grow, to get kids involved in the garden. Grow sweet corn, and then you can grow something, like popcorn that they can grow, and get some skills at growing and then pop and eat it, or you could grow something more like this mountain corn. But you can see it's large, it's tasseled, it's done really well. Again, we've got heat. Corn does well in the heat. So I think that's kind of our perfect combination this year, is heat and corn, and doing well there.
We hope you've enjoyed this video, and we hope you'll join us with the Greenhouse Show Saturday mornings from 8 to 11.